In a world where the AAA industry, especially when it comes to role-playing games, can be quite questionable, I wanted to talk about how I discover new RPGs and how I even came about this, how I sort of got into older school RPGs and how my tastes sort of evolved over time. It can often be tricky to find games that feel genuine, have integrity, and that's because the marketing of the video games industry, it's just going to try and push on titles to you where it's easy to spend a lot of money. They're not interested in you buying some 15-year-old title for $8 on GOG. They're going to be trying to push the new shiny product on you. So sometimes you have to look past that. For myself, role-playing games aren't even something I'm particularly nostalgic about. I've played most of the games I've loved as an adult from 20 plus, so I'm nearly 30 now. So for the last 10 years, that's where most of my role-playing game experience was. When I was a kid, 5, 6 years old, I was playing Super Mario Brothers 3 on the NES. I was playing Curse of Monkey Island on my PC, and from there I kind of played Nintendo games. I was really sort of a one-game person. I found it very difficult to get out of my comfort zone, which did change later. That kind of has to change if you're going to get the most out of enjoying RPGs. But I played stuff like COD 1 and 2 on computer when I was in primary school. I was really young, sort of 11, 12. I was playing multiplayer most of the time. I then moved on to, say, the RuneScapes, Lord of the Rings Online, World of Warcrafts of the world, and I kind of just stuck to one game, whether it was an MMO or something similar. So I missed out on a lot of games around that time, playing them when they came out, single-player releases. I was pretty much all in on multiplayer. That changed for me around the time I became an adult. I got new friends, and they introduced me to all the new AAA games that were coming out. They encouraged me to buy an Xbox 360, so I'm not even an old school PC person. I started pretty much on an Xbox for single-player games, and I played the Assassin's Creeds, the Far Cries, pretty much anything that was mainstream people were talking about. Skyrim, if we want to talk about RPGs, but nothing really old school back then. This all changed for me around the end of 2015 because I felt like I was just playing these mainstream titles as they came out. Back then, it was probably like Shadow of Mordor, the Lord of the Rings game. There was probably like Far Cry 4, whatever was coming out. And I just felt like I was on a treadmill. I felt like I was kind of playing games for the sake of it at times. I even felt like it wasn't for the fun of the content. I was kind of chasing like the rush of maybe getting an achievement or collecting everything that the game offered in the generic open world. And I felt relieved sometimes getting to the next game. I wasn't really feeling the joy of like learning about these worlds and the characters. And I thought, is this just me? Is gaming not for me? Well, that certainly changed because around that time, Divinity Original Sin 1 came out, at least on console, and I was looking at similar games to maybe some I'd enjoyed, like maybe Dragon Age Origins, just RPGs that were on like the Xbox consoles. And I wasn't recommended it by anyone, I just kind of found it on my own. It said on maybe the Xbox store that it was like other RPGs. I looked at screenshots and I thought, gee, this is weird. It looks different to other games I've played. It's like kind of isometric, like Age of Empires, but then it's apparently just an RPG. Interesting. So I purchased it, I started playing it, and it was like an epiphany for me. Something totally changed for me when it came to gaming. I was totally invested. I was totally immersed in this game. I loved it. I wasn't necessarily very good at it. I struggled, even though I did play it on Tactician, one of the harder difficulties. So I decided to do that because I wanted to get the most out of it, and I sucked. I probably died a lot. I had to do a lot of save scumming, constantly reloading if I died in combat. It didn't matter. I had so much fun with it, and I felt like I was really just engaged for the content itself. I wasn't trying to get an achievement. I wasn't on some sort of treadmill. It was just for the game. I absolutely loved it, and I played it from start to finish without really stopping and playing anything else. It was amazing. I probably spent sort of 80, maybe 100 plus hours on it. When I finished it, my first thought was, I need more of this. What other games out there are going to give me this Divinity Original Sin feeling? So I got searching on the internet, And that's where I found out the term CRPG, computer role-playing game. And I thought, aha, I've literally found a subgenre of all of these different types of games that I never knew existed, because at that time, not that many of them were really on consoles. Maybe Pillars of Eternity was on there, but I'd never heard of it. I was stuck in the mainstream AAA games for the most part, outside of a few sort of indie ones that get mainstream eyeballs to it. And as I was learning more about these CRPGs, it led me to websites like this. This is the RPG Codex. I've sort of referenced or shown it a few times in videos, so I'll explain this now. It's basically an RPG enthusiast website, but it is pretty much focused on PC RPGs, CRPGs. And doing my searching back then, trying to find similar games, I found this site, I found some other ones as well, and I heard all about these games that maybe I'd come across or I'd heard about once or twice, like Fallout, the original ones, Baldur's Gate, but I never really explored. I saw them as, oh, they're older games, they couldn't possibly be as good as these new ones. How could something be old be better than something new? That just couldn't be possible. At that time, I just didn't really understand, but one thing I did know is, hey, all these games, they're referencing computer role-playing game. Maybe I'm not going to get the most out of gaming on my Xbox, and so I moved pretty much everything to PC. I originally just played on whatever computer I had because I knew I was going to be exploring older games for the time being, because most of the best CRPGs I was hearing about, many of them were from the 90s, the early 2000s. So I thought, yeah, I'll just stick to my computer. I've had numerous new PCs since then because I still like some AAA games, but yeah, I pretty much moved totally to computer. In fact, I never touched the Xbox again after playing Divinity Original Sin. So that's sort of how much it changed gaming for me. And that kind of brings me back to this website because it's a fantastic resource. There is a discussion board, a forum, but there's also top RPG lists like this. We can see top 100 PC RPGs, and this helped me to discover so much. A lot of the games that are now my favorites, they came from lists like this, and basically, I don't see myself as any sort of elitist with RPGs. I don't only like them because I played them when I was 11 and 12, and now I just can't get interested in anything else, so I'm totally living in the past. Most of these games, I played them as an adult. I've played them in the last sort of 10, 9, 8 years, and I've still enjoyed them more than a lot of newer games. Now, I still like newer games. I enjoy the Elder Rings, obviously Baldur's Gate 3, many others. But you can get a great balance from both. If you find yourself playing newer titles and you just feel like something about this design, it feels like it wasn't totally made with passion. It's like the board of directors of the game company were just trying to push people to buy microtransactions, or they're desperate for you to get addicted to the game, so you keep buying the sequels, as we see in like Ubisoft games. You might find that the older titles will give you way more joy. And when I first got into them, so when I was looking for new RPGs to play, I saw titles like this, Planescape Torment, that I'd never heard about before. And so I jumped into it. This is where I sort of got out of my comfort zone and thought, all right, I'll try this. And some of it was confusing for me at first because I'd never touched anything to do with Dungeons & Dragons. I'd never played it in real life. I'd never really played too many video games to do with it. I mean, I played Dragon Age Origins, but even when I played that, I don't feel like I played it almost the right way. I was trying to play it almost like when I played a Far Cry or something. I was just rushing through the content and I wasn't that invested. Whereas when I stopped and really just focused on the systems, learned about them, invested my time into the game, that's when I got much more out of it. And something like a Planescape Torment, it requires you to do a bit of reading. It requires that investment, but then you do get a lot out of it. And I'm actually looking forward to going back to games like this soon, because when I played Planescape Torment, it was one of the first CRPGs I played, and I'm more experienced with, say, Dungeons & Dragons now. I think I'll enjoy it even more. So that's a nice thing as well, being able to go back to these games, not even including that because they're Western RPGs, there's often many ways you can play them. Different builds, different choices that lead you down different paths. It's all fantastic, and there was plenty of other titles, say Fallout. My only experience sort of before CRPGs was playing the likes of Fallout 3, Fallout 4, and at that time, I thought that was gaming at its very best, that it couldn't get any better. And again, I don't want to be elitist about it. There are good things about those games. I think maybe different strengths, like the exploration solid, even if the RPG mechanics and story are not really that great, certainly by old school Fallout standards. I played Fallout 1. It's one of my favorite games of all time. It's in my top 10 regardless of genre. Because I will say I enjoy a lot of different genres of games. I mentioned point and clicks like Monkey Island. I still play Nintendo games. I still play plenty of other genres, horror and so on. It's not only RPGs, but again, I'd have Fallout in my top 10 regardless of genre. This game is kind of simple, but in the right way. It's not really complicated. It is somewhat in-depth. It is somewhat in-depth with its systems. It's got much more than you'll find in most AAA RPGs, but if you're looking for an accessible CRPG to jump into and really try these to see if you'd like them, Fallout is probably the one I would recommend above any other one. It's not long, it's around sort of 25, 30 hours, even if you're new to it, to get through, so it's not a massive investment. And I think whether you'll like RPGs or not, as long as you enjoy the setting, it'll kind of tell you if CRPGs are for you. I definitely recommend that as your first old school one versus like Planescape Torment, which is more of a visual novel slash RPG. And as I kind of went through and explored these games, I actually started on a list like this, just going through them one by one, and it obviously took time. Some of these RPGs are hundreds of hours, like Baldur's Gate 2. And this obviously isn't really niche anymore because of the fact that Baldur's Gate 3 is out, but it was one of the bigger RPGs of its time, like 2000, but that is comparing sort of games then to now, which is massively different. Even though this was popular for its time, still kind of niche in the grand scheme of things, and this one's just like a huge epic adventure. And I think the difference, the reason this would sort of struggle, I think, with gamers today is you actually start pretty much in the main city after a small intro section, which means you're immediately sort of thrown into this massive map full of buildings, people to talk to, and I think that would just turn off some mainstream gamers where they'd struggle with all the talking and the dialogue before really jumping into combat and things like that, whereas Baldur's Gate 3 probably knew that. It probably thought, let's just go with sort of your typical D&D experience to start with. We'll have some settlements, but we'll leave the city till later on, so I can kind of understand it. Baldur's Gate 2, though, it's incredible. It may be better than the third one. I mean, I only played this for the first time probably 6 or 7 years ago. So I'm not nostalgia goggles. I didn't play it when I was 10, and I'm just saying that. It is really incredible with its content and its diversity of content. Whereas Baldur's Gate 1, it's really typical. It's just your sort of generic fantasy adventure, and I'm sure some people are nostalgic about it, but I'd rate this one like 10 times better than Baldur's Gate 1 in terms of it being memorable, the content, the characters. It's got a great villain, really good villain. I'd say stronger than pretty much most of the villains in Baldur's Gate 3, even though they are decent. So I'd highly recommend this. And as you kind of go through, you get to these games you've just never heard of before. Arcanum, I'd never heard of it. Some people I'm sure did as kids, if maybe their dad, their older brother were onto it, but not me. I didn't know about this. One of my favorites. It's fantastic. The creator of this was also the creator of Fallout, and I'm really looking forward to going back to this because I've only played it once and it was so memorable. The setting, steampunk, which is kind of a mixture in this world. It's kind of like there's technology. We're talking guns, machinery, anything that you'd sort of have in like the 1920s, let's say, and maybe before that. But then it's also mixed with magic, and basically magic and technology cannot mix. There's deep problems in the world, and the core of the game is that tech and magic just cannot mix together. It's not going to go well. So that's kind of where the story comes from and how you get into the world. And it's not a perfect game. None of the games I'm talking about are necessarily perfect. If you're playing them for the first time, there will be things you need to get used to, because back then, games just weren't as accessible. They relied on you maybe reading the instruction manual, which was provided a physical copy, unlike now, where even if you buy the physical, it's a disc. It may or may not have the whole game on it. You've still got to download some of it. And we're used to that on Steam and stuff. But back then it was the norm that you would read through instructions. It was just a part of the experience, which I think is quite cool. I kind of miss that. But this is another one I might even have in my top 10 of all time, just because of how unique it feels. I've played very few RPGs that feel like this. And then as you go through, you get, of course, Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines. I've talked about the sequel many times on this channel, and that's because I played through the original and absolutely loved it. It is made by the same people who made Arcanum that we just spoke about. Again, really unique. You're not going to play many RPGs like this. Set in the Masquerade universe, or even just let alone vampires. Anything of this nature. So many RPGs, generic fantasy, even before, say, the late 90s. So many RPGs were Dungeons and Dragons, and that's it. That's where sort of RPGs just came from, because you had the existing systems, and it was what people were used to. But then, companies, developers, they started to take more risks, which is how we saw games like Arcanum, Bloodlines, and many others that you'll see on that top 100 RPG list that we've been going through. If you do a bit of research into that time, the sad thing is, it feels like games were just hitting a stride where risks were being taken, we were seeing real innovation, such as with titles like Deus Ex around that period, but then it just dropped off completely. And why did that happen? It's partly because you had, say, the Xbox and PS2 reaching peak popularity, and I'm not some salty PC gamer. I just explained that I was playing on an Xbox around that time. I just didn't know because I didn't know any better. That was what was being advertised. I wasn't going online doing research about this crap. I just bought a console, bought the games that were advertised me. It was just until I looked into it, got recommendations, looked into other games, I realized that games could be much more. And again, around that period, 2002, 2003, that's kind of when it changed. Games became more mainstream, and the innovation just kind of died when it came to AAA and beyond. And I just noticed something. They're selling Bloodlines for $15 on sale. It's $30 when it's full price. I mean, this was owned by Activision. They were the publisher. Now it's obviously with Microsoft, but Jesus Christ, you would think a game this old, they could give it to you a good bit cheaper. Even though it's $15, it'll be the best $15 you've ever spent. I would still think it would be a little bit cheaper. That's a bit of a rip-off. But the last one I just want to mention on this list, and again, hundreds of games on here. I haven't gone through all of them. Even though it's top 100, you're not really getting sort of worse and worse as you go through. So many of these are just top quality. We can see even New Vegas. That's not a real old game. This list isn't just totally a bunch of boomers saying anything released after like the year 1995 is automatically crap. There's a reasonable mix here where there are some newer titles, but you can often tell they have that old school influence. So New Vegas, that was kind of by the original Fallout team in terms of personnel. Dark Souls is on here. Even though that feels kind of new, it is innovative for its time. I think it does have some of that Western RPG influence, even though it's by a Japanese developer. It's just kind of in there, and I think it's why it took off and became so popular, not because of marketing, because of word of mouth. People just absolutely loved it. I've mentioned Deus Ex. So good. I look forward to replaying this one as well. It's one of the greatest games ever. There's so much there. It's really sad to hear the recent news that we won't be getting a new one. Maybe that's for the best. Maybe they would have screwed that up. But I just want to mention Gothic, because that was so special to me. When I first played Gothic 1, Gotham 2 around sort of 8 years ago, something about the way they did the open world design, nothing else has come close since then. And given I've spent so much time with these mainstream titles like Assassin's Creed, to go back and play this, it just kind of spoke to me. I understood what I was kind of missing from these games, where I could even see the design problems for myself without having played these older ones. And when I played this, I thought, how has this not been a thing for the last 20 years? Why did this stop? Why don't we have more games like Gothic? Because every section of the map you explore, there's always some sort of piece of content there. Whether it's a hidden quest, or it's just a hidden little nook or cranny with some gear or a health potion or items that you might need. Because the world's so dangerous, it means that you need to find things to heal yourself, make yourself stronger. I can talk about it, but without playing it, it's difficult to sort of comprehend. And I would recommend this at least as much as anything else on the list. Gothic 1 first, then Gothic 2. It's genuinely amazing. And there are other titles, of course, like Morrowind. I was familiar with this one, given this one is quite mainstream. But again, I only played this properly through probably about 8 years ago, and I absolutely loved it. It's certainly better than Oblivion. It's better than Skyrim, I think. It's just got that older school design, the RPG systems. It's not an action game by any stretch. I don't think it's perfect. I think because I come into it without it being a nostalgic game for me, I only played it as an adult, I can see some of the flaws. For instance, the world's just not as exciting to explore as the Gothic games, which I just mentioned. And those two titles somewhat competed during that period of time, but Gothic just kind of fell off, issues with the developer, while Bethesda kept continuing. And so many games here where you'll see not just the titles, but also user reviews based on them. And this wasn't one person putting together a list and they're biased. A lot of people voted, but it was done in quite a smart way where it wasn't like people could just vote for The Witcher 3 only, which is on this list, and it just sort of jumps its way straight to the top. There are a number of different metrics, so I haven't seen a better list than this one, and it's kind of backed that up by me just playing new games that I haven't tried before. I've often enjoyed them. So many great CRPGs. On top of this, I've spoken about indie games a lot. They can often be tricky to find because there's no marketing. It's often a person making them who's doing it as maybe a second job or maybe just a hobby. And they need all the help that they can get to kind of get the world out there. I mentioned this was a forum, the RPG Codex, so you can find plenty of games that people post about. Often the developers themselves will be on here talking about their own indie games, giving you some insights that you might not just find in a trailer. And some to sort of mention Monomyth, that's made by one person. It looks really nice. If you're interested in Avowed or you're disappointed by Avowed, might be worth looking into. It's a first-person dungeon crawler, let's say, probably quite combat-focused. I love how it looks. Plenty of others, The Legends of Amberland, old school RPG. You can just keep going and find so many. I won't go into any more, but I just wanted to give a little bit of context on how I got into these RPGs and also how I found them. I'm not just someone riding on nostalgia. I can't hack it that new games are popular, mainstream games are popular. I was someone who liked a lot of popular games. Something didn't feel right about it. I wasn't influenced by anyone. I wasn't just following some crowd, and that's why I got into old games. I found them by myself. And that's how I started to find the subgenres, the titles I really enjoyed. So CRPGs are some of my favorite games. I hope they get better in the mainstream because they used to be. Things changed. Again, around 2002, 2003, it all got console focused, and I guess more in-depth games were kind of left behind. That's why I love to see Baldur's Gate 3 doing well, Disco Elysium, other titles doing really well. It's a great thing, and I hope more people discover it. They realize maybe some of the games that they're attached to, they're not doing it for them and they look to others. We see it with the Starfields of the world. People feel it's not quite right. The good news is people aren't just mindlessly consuming games like that as much. I think people are realizing they can have a higher standard. So hopefully you do find some games, whether it's from lists like this or going to RPG websites, but you do have to look for them. If you rely on what's advertised to you, you're just going to get peddled crap that's designed to fleece you, get you buying microtransactions, getting you to spend. So hopefully this was helpful. Thanks so much for listening. I'll see you on the next one. Cheers. Bye.